with our good friends in Knoxville. Welcome in Sam Granville on the program. Sam, let's start off here with this men's basketball team. They played Alabama. They've played some really entertaining, interesting games the last couple of times that they've matched up. The last time, Bama was up for a long time, but Tennessee wins the game. It kind of worked in reverse this time around, where Tennessee seemingly had a lead, a commanding lead. I think it was 13 points at one point, but then Alabama makes the plays, and they win it by 2, 71-69. What'd you make of that collapse and some of the things that it might project forward, or do you think it's just like a one-off, really good team, really hot team came in and won?
Yeah, no, Alabama did everything at the end that they needed to do to win that game. And, it obviously hurts. You can't just throw it all on the fact that, Nate Ament didn't play in the second half other than, maybe 30 seconds before leaving the court, but you can't blame it entirely on that. But if you look back at the last 2 months of basketball, they've kind of had this pattern. The Vols have had this pattern of they go up in the first half, the start of the second half, whatever team it is in SEC play seems to kind of work their way back into it. And then, the star freshman gets hot and there's no answer for him on the defensive side of the ball. And somehow the Vols end up pulling back out to a 10-point lead and end up winning the game. Now, when you don't have, a potential lottery pick on the court that can come in and get those clutch buckets, that can make those plays, and that can, guard on the perimeter with the length that he has, that certainly makes it difficult. Now, again, I wouldn't say that the loss entirely stems from him not being on the court. That certainly helps the Vols anytime the Nate Ament's on the court. But there was a lot of missed layups from the big men on the inside. There was a lot of missed opportunities, and then you need 1 or 2 stops and 1 or 2 rebounds, and you win the game, and they didn't get either one of those. So I think Bama did what they needed to do. LeBaron Thielen, he was phenomenal at the end of the game. He had 23 points, and 15 of those 23 were in the final 10 minutes. So he came alive at the end, and the Vols didn't really have a player that stepped up and did that because with no Nate on the court, the defense could key on Jacoby Gillespie, and that's something that we've talked about here is, you kind of need both of them so that, when you key on one, the other's there to make plays. And when he's not there, bad things happen. And that's what happened the other night.
And I mean, we'll talk about Nate Ament and moving forward and if he's going to be okay as we start to get ready for the SEC tournament here. But does it give you any promise, the fact that this was such a close game and Nate Ament, as you mentioned, went down with an injury, left pretty early in the second half and only scored 2 points, for it to still be pretty close? Is that a promising sign for this team?
I would say to an extent, yeah. I mean, when, as far as future potential goes, Nate is the best player on the team.
Right.
Jacoby's probably the best college basketball player on that team. He still had a phenomenal night where I think he had 23 points, 7 assists, and 8 steals, somewhere along that line. So a near triple-double with assists and steals.
Recite
so a great
that.
game from right, just phenomenal, and to not have Nate certainly hurts. But I do think that they were right there in it. And anytime you're in SEC play, and you can take it down to a 1 to 2 possession game, which is what most games end up being, except for Florida right now, where they seem to be playing a different level of basketball and just absolutely obliterating Arkansas the other night. Most of these games are going to come down to the 1 or 2 plays. No matter which team is on the end of losing a player, like we talked about with Vandy last week and Tyler Tanner having the flu, that still came down to a 1 or 2 possession game. So I think these teams are built well enough across, the SEC and kind of that, 2 through 7 range that all of those contests are really going to come down to maybe they're all going to finish within single digits, most likely, no matter who's on the court. And that's just how they're built for each other. That's how they game plan against each other. So I think it certainly hurt, but it was a good sign that they were able to keep it as close as they did. I think it would have been an even better sign had they won the game.
Yeah, you referenced Nate Ament's injury earlier. Patrick talked about it as well, where you have a guy, you mentioned it, I think it's a good point, the fact that he might be a lottery pick going into the draft. Now that he's got this injury, how do you think they balance this? And I hate to ask this about college athletics, but we're in a point where we kind of have to. How much do you have to balance this based on what his future is on the next level and what he could do for this team moving forward? already been ruled out for tonight's game against South Carolina. But obviously he's got a future to think about outside of a Vols uniform, but also wants to do his best with the Vols. How do you think Rick Barnes handles this next he's not playing today, but this next week, 2 weeks going into the tournament?
No, that's an excellent question. Something that we were just talking about here. You know, when you look at a young player who, yes, he's wearing Tennessee right now, and yes, he's on half the billboards around Knoxville right now, but he is a $4 or $5 million man right now as an NIL basketball player that's representing the University of Tennessee. He was paid to come here, and he has a job that's try to get this team as far as possible while wearing Tennessee orange, and he knows that he's a one-and-done player. Everybody knew that he was a one-and-done player coming in, so you have seen that. I mean, we saw that this past season with the Vol football team. Jermon McCoy, he had a phenomenal season last year. He had a lot of good tape, and then when it came to this year, everybody was going, okay, is he going to take the field? Is he going to take the field? And he never suited up, not even once this past season. He's most likely going to be a first-round draft pick as a corner coming up in April. So sometimes you got to weigh those benefits. I think when you ask me what does Rick Barnes think, I think Rick is going to do what's best for Nate, because if you have seen the consistency throughout this season, the way that Rick Barnes talks about Nate Ament, it's almost like he's talking about his son or his grandson. Like, he talks about Nate as, man, this is a high-character individual who is highly competitive, and he helps us win games. Because that's something we talked about earlier this season. Well, he's not putting up those 30-point performances. He's not, just dropping jaws in the way that he's scoring, but he's helping Tennessee win games. And I think Rick Barnes has the utmost respect for Nate, maybe more than most players that he's ever coached. The way that he talks about him, if you hear him in every single press conference, the way that he talks about Nate and the pain that he had talking about Nate the other night after the game when he was hurt, you can see it. And so I think when it comes down to doing what's best for Nate, which versus doing what's best for this team, maybe winning 1 or 2 more games in a tournament, I think he's going to do what's best for Nate. But we'll see how it shakes out. We'll see what his health looks like. I would be surprised to see him. He's not going to play Tuesday night tonight against South Carolina. I would say it's very unlikely that he's going to play Saturday, just for the sense of, if you have the opportunity to rest him, to prepare him for the Southeastern Conference tournament, you're going to do that. So I'd be very surprised to see him play on Saturday, but we'll see what happens when it comes to the tournament.
So what I'm hearing is there's not going to be a Darren Peterson, Bill Self drama between Nate Ament and Rick Barnes. Is that correct?
I would be very, very surprised to see Rick Barnes change his tune on the way that he's done. I mean, Rick Barnes is a phenomenal man. I love just his character and the way that he talks about basketball, about sports, about people. But the way that he talks about Nate this season is like, man, like, that is a proud grandfather. That is a proud father who's talking about this young man. Like, he truly adores him and the way that he operates, on and off the court. So I think if to get Rick Barnes ever saying anything negative about Nate Ament, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. But they were, of course, without him in that game against Alabama. Head coach Rick Barnes talked about that towards the end of the game on Saturday.
Well, I don't know, it was the last couple minutes. I think the first 4 minutes of the game, last 4 of the first half, and the first 4 of the second, obviously the last 4 of the game. They came out and I think scored 11 straight points to start the second half, and we were able to somewhat hang on there and build the lead back up. But, I'm not sure. We put the pressure on ourselves with the turnovers at the wrong time. When, I thought a point in the game was critical where we could have maybe gave ourselves even more breathing room was when Jacoby was out of the game and we had 2 bad turnovers at that point. But our ball screen coverage broke down more than anything in the second half. Philon's a terrific player, but we did not do what we had done the whole first half. You really tough. They're extremely hard team to guard, as everybody knows, but when you allow them to reject ball screens and get downhill, those type things, it makes it even more difficult, and we just blew too many ball screen coverages.